You're listening to Meredith Lake on ABC Alice Springs.
Well, today, across Australia, schools, councils and community groups are marking Harmony Day. Here in Alice Springs, a citizenship ceremony is underway pretty much as you and I speak. Internationally, though, today is known as the United Nations Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. To find out more, you're with the NT's Anti-Discrimination Commissioner, Jeswin Yogaratnam. Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning, Meredith.
What is today about? What is the UN Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination?
Well, today is really about that reflection on right stories from wrong stories by educating ourselves about the racial empathy gap and the knowledge and the importance of the UN treaty. So as you mentioned, globally, we are celebrating the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And this day is observed, annually on 21st of March, reminding us that racism still exists, just in case, anyone was under the illusion that we've solved it. So the day really marks, what happened in 1916 Sharpeville massacre in South Africa, when police opened fire on a peaceful anti-apartheid protesters, killing about 69 people. So it's really a day for reflection, recognizing, those convenient untruths, but also the inconvenient truths over time in relation to the whole area on racial discrimination.
Commissioner, you would have a better sense than most, I suspect, of the big picture of where the Northern Territory is at. What's your sense of, racial discrimination here at the moment? Has it been a busy year for complaints, for example, or what would you say about how the NT fares at the moment?
Well, clearly a busy year. It's always a busy year within the space of the Commission. But what I can say is that my sense is that there's perhaps a sense of denial or intentional reluctance to accept that it exists. And probably it's because we do not want to deal with the reality of acknowledging or the fear of consequences, acknowledging it, and the investment that perhaps we need to sort of consider in terms of how to address it. I mean, if you take, for example, there's a Children's Commissioner's report recently saying that 80% of children and young people in Northern Territory who have been surveyed, have experienced racism or seen racism. Here at the Commission, for example, we had about 67 complaints on race discrimination last year, and that made up to about 9% of our complaints. 27% of our complaints come from First Nations communities, and about 32% of that also come from non-English speaking background. So it is tracking as an issue within our community here in the Northern Territory.
In an ideal world, what kind of investment would you like to see here in the Territory?
I think we'd like to see more investment in the context of education and training, in terms of more inclusive education in schools. That's reflective of, the context of race within this country, from the time of which this has become an issue in the past to where we are now and how we are faring. We can't guise it in the context of the exotic aspects of what race is about just through the food and cultural context. We need to really address these issues in a meaningful way so people can reflect and understand why this is important. And I think that will help improve social cohesion. I think the investment is also in relation to some of the new reforms that have come into the Territory, which are great for the Territory. For example, the positive duty laws. So the positive duty laws are about the way in which we shift culture within businesses and organizations in terms of how we eliminate and prevent things like racial discrimination. So it's really important that the investment is put into organizations, because really you're investing in emotional intelligence that will then help your organization shift those systemic discriminatory structures in your organization, so the unconscious bias, towards a space where everyone becomes a bystander for each other. And that's what social cohesion is about. And we've already seen this investment in the NT. I've noted, for example, at the governmental level, you've got the Office of the Commissioner of the Public Employment, who has enabled a lot of the positive duty work to be embedded within the code of practice here within through all government agencies. Mm-hmm. We've also got NT WorkSafe that's also done something similar through embedding it within the workplace environment as a form of psychosocial hazards. So there is investment, but we need to see more investment also within our commission so we can actually do the outreach, work with community, empower them, and give them what they need in terms of making that cultural difference or that shift within the organizations.
You're hearing from the NT's Anti-Discrimination Commissioner this morning on ABC Alice Springs. It is 16 minutes past 10 this Friday, the 21st of March today, known as Harmony Day here in Australia and everywhere else in the world as the UN Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Speaking of positive duties, Commissioner, I know that Australia's national anti-racism framework is to be launched in a matter of weeks' time. What can you tell me about that framework, its essential goal, and what do you think it will mean, especially here in the Northern Territory?
Sure, thanks for that question, Meredith, because just a plug here that, the Commission will be organising a positive duty oration with the Federal Race Discrimination Commissioner Giridharan Sivaraman on the 2nd of April, 5:30 to 7 p.m. at the Danala campus, CDU campus. So, the positive duty in terms of the national anti-racism framework, it was the framework that was developed by the Australian Human Rights Commission, dedicated to, addressing some of the key systemic aspects. And that framework had found about 63 recommendations based on a whole of society approach in terms of addressing some of those more critical aspects into areas of health, education, and also in media. And you note that some of the outcomes of those recommendations also led to the inquiries in relation to ABC, where Terry Junkin had done a review in the context of racism within that space itself.
The ABC's been through a really substantial internal process to identify and make recommendations to address shortcomings when it comes to racial inclusion here at the national broadcaster. That's true.
Yeah, absolutely. And that Listen Loudly, Act Strongly, review that was done by the independent entity Terry Junkie really is important. Especially, I take on board recommendation 12, which was, especially we're talking about, International Day here on Elimination of Racial Discrimination, where ABC should progress protocols on voice coaching for diversity. And I'll just take note of what that means, that ABC supports the recommendation to progress protocols on voice coaching, where it will work on developing these protocols to ensure that diversity of voices, accents, and communication styles are included and respected in our storytelling and representation across, all of the ABC. So, in the day where we're celebrating the International Convention on Elimination of all forms of discrimination, these are the positive steps that we can actually talk about, but also make sure we take action so there's some tangible outcomes and it's not just another recommendation on paper.
Commissioner Yogaratnam, really appreciate your time.
Always love talking to you, Meredith. Have a good day.
You too. That is the NT's Anti-Discrimination Commissioner, Yaswin Yogaratnam, on the line from Darwin, this UN Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination.
You're listening to Meredith Lake on ABC Alice Springs.